All right. Well, hello everybody. I'm Stan Hu, an engineering fellow here at GitLab. I'm just going to talk very briefly about what it means to thrive as a GitLab engineer. Um, this is really intended for new people and to get a kind of a better grasp of what's going on here in the company. I'll give you a quick introduction. I worked at a lot of other startups in the past. In a range of fields. I started my career doing software design defined radio, I should say, before anyone really knew what that meant. And it was part of a team that produced one of the first FCC certified cellular base station for a company out in Massachusetts. I've worked on electrical vehicles, and then before GitLab, I was part of a small team that worked with Google Street View to deploy air quality sensors as sort of a pilot project. And then I came to GitLab because I worked at a company that was doing network optimization, and we set up a GitLab instance, and that was in 2014. And the first thing I noticed was that while GitLab did a great job of doing source control, I didn't really have a lot of visibility in what the team was working on. I would have to refresh GitLab constantly. And then I really wanted to see Slack notifications and about like when somebody checked in code or created an issue and things like that. And I looked at this issue on GitLab.com, and everyone would say, yes, more Slack notifications, +1, +1. But there was no activity around it. And so, eventually I got tired and said, well, I'm just going to add it. I don't know Ruby on Rails, but I know Python, I know C, C++, I think I can figure it out. So I spent some time looking at the code base and kind of being amazed how well structured and well understandable it was. And so I submitted my first merge request shortly after that, around November in 2014. And then I waited. I didn't get a response back. You should look at the merge request comments, but like you can see in the comments that I waited for 2 months, didn't get a response. I pinged like Maren. He said, I'm busy, I'll get back to it. And eventually, what I didn't know at the time is that the company was at Y Combinator, and they were, scrambling to get stuff done. I think Sid finally saw the merge request and asked Dowie, who was a longtime member of GitLab, not at the time, but he just joined, to review the merge request. And finally, that's really what started me on my path to contribute to GitLab. I finally got feedback from Dowie. We went back and forth. I really enjoyed the process. I got it merged in. I was really excited. And so I kept looking for other things to do because, I was using GitLab day to day, and I really wanted to make it better for myself. And so I was using their bug reports to kind of figure out what I should work on next, because I knew it was going to benefit me, and also it was always going to help the wider community. So eventually I just got their attention because I was submitting so many merge requests. I was invited to the core team. I think Maren invited me back in June of 2015. And my first question was, what obligations are there? And he said, there are none. So I said, okay, happy to join. I was like super excited about that. And then GitLab had their first summit in Amsterdam. I think the company was about 30, 40 people at the time. And so I attended that as a core team member, not as an employee. And that's when I met more of the team members. I met Sid in San Francisco, but DZ and Valerie and other longtime members of GitLab was the first time I actually had a chance to put a face to the name after working with them for over a year. And then after in a year or so, I was looking to do something else. And I had GitLab always in the back of my mind, but I didn't really think there was a role for me there. But before I took my next offer, I shot an email to Sid and said, hey, I'm thinking of going somewhere else, but is there something GitLab has available? And then we started talking, and long story short, I joined as the VP of engineering in April of 2016. So the company was about 70 people when I joined. Over my time, it grew over 200. And then we hired Eric Johnson to kind of scale up the team further, and I switched to an IC role, and we created this engineering fellow role. And that has been sort of where I am now. 5 years later, fast forward, I'm still in this role, and I'm loving it. So that's sort of a brief history. Any questions about that?
Yeah, probably one question in the Q&A that relates to this section that you just shared. So how did your day-to-day routine look like 7 years ago? It's been 7 years since you've been here, so that's a long time.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said in the document, when I first started, most of my time was spent on one-on-ones. I had, 10 or 15 reports, depending on the time of the year. I was spending a lot of time doing that. I was spending a lot of time on presentations, giving updates. We went through a few organization changes there, updating the board. I would spend a lot of time, updating slides for the board, giving them updates of where engineering was going. And just like I wasn't doing a lot of hands-on work. I was, most of it was, other team members, but, we were doing a lot of, we were scrambling at the time to get like to scale out like the NFS solution. GitLab was running on NFS at the time. And so we had a lot of challenges with that of scaling out the file system and things like that. So, there was questions about, do we use the cloud or we do our own, roll our own bare metal? And for a while, we were going to, spin up our own hardware because we were going to run this distributed file system that required that. And I spent a lot of time talking to vendors, and then eventually the boards convinced us that was a terrible idea. In retrospect, they were right, because you get a lot of things for free when you run the cloud. And today it seems like, yeah, of course, but at the time, we were really weren't sure about that because Dropbox and other companies had moved away from Amazon for a number of reasons, and we thought we were in the same boat. So I was spending a lot of my time kind of thinking about those kind of problems and still dealing with like the releases and trying to get releases out the door. So it was kind of frenetic in that sense that I was trying to do a lot of things at once and not doing a great job at all at any particular one. Since then, I've been much more technically focused. I still get pulled into tough customer issues. We had an incident a couple of years ago from one of our premier customers, and I spent a lot of stressful time dealing with that. I went to Austin for another customer to deal with some of their challenges, and every now and then I get pulled into something that's really high priority and sort of works on cross-functional latest stuff. For example, it's like FIPS compliance that requires talking to almost every team at GitLab because it affects everybody. And then, lately, I think we were dealing with this SSH problem where IPs are not working, and the allow listing is not working for SSH connections. And so that's, again, it's kind of a cross-functional initiative between infrastructure and source code. So that's what I'm working on today. So, if that gives you a brief overview that like, I'm much happier just kind of focusing on a lot of these technical things. And Eric's done a great job of worrying about how do we grow our company from 200 to 1500 and beyond.
Yeah, lovely. There are a lot of questions. So Stan, a question for you. How would you like to run the session? Do you have more slides?
I have more slides, but I'm happy just to this is more interactive for all you. So I think I'll prioritize the questions right now, and we can go answer anything in the slides that you.
Yeah, okay, so I have the next two. Let's go through my questions really fast because
Sure.
there are nicer ones down the list. But okay, so I moved from sales to engineering about 7-8 months ago, and I felt that when I joined a remote organization in the sales team, there was a lot of lubrication in the machine. Like you knew there were methods or mechanisms to know what all is available and who do you speak to. On the engineering side, I find that part a little challenging. Like what is available in the ecosystem that we call our engineering team, and how do you navigate through that? So could you share some light on that?
Yeah, that's a pretty big question. There's a lot of different things that we can talk about here, right? First of all, is the onboarding set up in a way that you can kind of get a lay of the land very quickly, right? I think there's I'm not sure for your role, but other roles like reliability engineering, they've got onboarding that is very focused on like looking at our run books, our documentation, understanding all those aspects of it. And if it's not documented, obviously we need to do a better job of it. Part of it also is just like, having personal connections with different people on the team, so it may be helpful to have coffee chats with certain, just take a sampling, people in support, people in, reliability, people on the back end, and just kind of get a lay of the land of like what people are working on. I mean, I think, having been here for a while, I have a good sense of what all the different teams are working on, but that's just from, over time, either seeing their name pop up or looking at their merge request or, just having dealt with incidents in the past. So, I think it's incubation is interesting because you're a new team and you're still trying to understand like how you fit in with the rest of the backend team. And maybe Eduardo, you have some comments. You've been here for a while now. You've worked with a lot of the different backend and reliability GitLab teams. I mean, this is a question for you. Like, what have you found useful?
Yeah. So the org chart is very useful. At least you know where you are and who you are talking to. I always try to go to the team first, or should ask anywhere where should be the team be. And the best way to get help is with an MR. If you get an MR, it's a lot easier than asking for help in chats or in Slack channels, because then people are like, it's almost like you become a menace and people have to manage the menace that you became. So that helps out. That helped me a lot over time. One-on-ones are very important. I've had issues of not building the right relationship over time, and I had successes of building the right relationship over time. So those are very important. Understand what are the areas that you're going to be touching, not now, but in 2 months, and start building the relationships that you need right now. So with the engineers, with the product, with PMs, this can go for the team. This can go with the stage level and so on and so forth. It depends a lot on the specific group, and some areas are a lot more delicate than others. So that there's that as well.
Right, thank you. And the last one from my side for you, Stan. In the last 7 years, looking back, if there was one thing that you would have done differently?
One thing I didn't do, so let me think. Well, I think top of mind, we had an incident early on in GitLab where somebody accidentally dropped the GitLab.com database. And I think I would have prioritized the backups and focus on the backup restore a lot sooner, because that was we were lucky we recovered from that, but it was just by dumb luck that we happened to have like a backup sitting around at some machine. So I think that's one thing I would have done differently. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of different things that I wish I handled better in the past. So, for example, when I was in reporting to Sid, there were a lot of different things related to just team performance and things like that, and how I handled that. And obviously you can't you learn from those lessons, but those were also things I'd wish I had done a little better.
Lovely, thank you. Hannes, you have the next one.
They're not a priority though, so
yeah, no, this is really
I don't. Okay. I just don't want to steal all the time because I have a few things. I recently joined GitLab, so thanks for doing this session for us. I think I will learn a lot from it. One thing I try to understand is like, how do I see grow at GitLab? From a senior engineer staff, I think principal is the next step. And I got a conversation last week with a staff front-end engineer, and I was kind of like, yeah, it seems like you're doing cross-organizational work, which in my previous company was mostly considered a few teams as a staff engineer, but probably someone who is like working across organizations across bigger organizations. It's kind of like a principal engineer. So I wanted to understand like what your thoughts are, like what is a principal engineer? What is the difference between you and us and the principal engineer?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think Eric has done a good job of kind of trying to lay out the different the roles. And I always point people to the handbook because there's these job descriptions, and Eric has done a great job of thinking through all the different things. But so I can only do my best. I summarize kind of what I think is helpful here. And at GitLab, I think that it's a little nebulous because roles roles do change. I mean, obviously add more roles in between. We've done that in the past. We didn't have I think we have distinguished, and now we have senior distinguished and things like that. So it's kind of in flux at the time. It's also challenging for me because I pivoted from one role to another, and I didn't kind of I'm helping people go up the track that we have today, but I don't have a good sense of having gone through it myself. Take my advice for what it's worth. I do think it is like the idea behind these different levels is that the difficulty of the issues and the sort of the breadth of the issues increase as you kind of go up. So people, I think you're kind of expected to be able to jump into almost any problem that sometimes, because I get pulled into all sorts of crazy stuff that I haven't looked at before. And for people in support and other engineering, it's like, well, I'm just the person to ask, even though I may have no idea what is actually the problem. So from my perspective, I just feel like I have to be willing to deal with anything that comes my way and work on, whether it's a scalability issue in Gitly or some problem with the customer, just be able to jump into it without kind of hesitation, I think is sort of what I've found that valuable. Also be able to look at an incident and figure out like the 10 things we need to do and kind of help teams figure out like what is a priority of things. So, one thing I found instructive with the FIPS stuff is that like a lot of people just don't know what it means to be FIPS compliant. I didn't know what FIPS compliant was. And I spent the last 3 months understanding what it was and be able to go through the issues and say, no, you don't have to worry about that. Yes, you have to worry about that. And just kind of help prioritize like what's really important and what's just can be kind of tabled for later. In kind of a cross-functional way, right? So right now I'm spending a lot of my time just doing that and trying to help teams prioritize what's really important, because I think that's one of the struggles we have at GitLab right now. There's so many things that we want to work on, and there's so many things that we need to fix. But what is it that we have time and bandwidth for? And people like Andrew Newdigate has done a good job of like doing. You should look at his Tamland project, which is like a scalability. Capacity planning project, and he basically has looked at a lot of our metrics and try to scope out like how much of this is going to be a problem in a month, 2 months, 3 months, right? And so it gives you a good way of looking at what's really important today and how do you get teams kind of aligned against that. So I would point to those people like Camille and Andrew for doing like a lot of work and knowing what we need to do as an organization, because a lot of the hard problems we have requires a team effort, right? We need 5-10 people really focused on it. And then I think the role of these principal and higher engineers is kind of help lead that direction and try to break down the work in pieces and make it possible for other people to get stuff done. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like I think I was expecting like scope, but it's defined different in every company, a bit different in every company.
It is, and like I said, that handbook page. Hopefully, if it's not clear, then it's a merge request, right? Like if you find something in that thing that's not clear, it's submitted to Eric and you can get it fixed and tweaked the way you want it to. So in some ways it's like you can help shape the role, which is what I love about GitLab. This is not a static thing. It's not from above that says you must do this to make it to principal and above, right? You can say, hey, look, this is a perfectly valid path and propose it. So that's why it says a little bit nebulous.
Love that. Help shape the role. Eduardo, you have a follow-up for this?
Yeah, my follow-up is that incubation engineering is a very specific thing, right? It's just different. Like a lot of expectations are already like built in because we work horizontally. We are very dynamically. We start something today and next week we might change to something completely different, perhaps. We do the tracking across the teams. We build the relationships. We are the eyes by default on everything we do. And this, at least from the description over there, they are baked into the principal role and not on the staff role. How would you see a principal incubation engineer? how would you say, like, okay, this guy should be a principal incubation engineer?
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
is-
like I said, it is a little bit thing, but I could see, I could just give like just examples off the top of my head, right? Like machine learning obviously is going to be a big part of the future of software development, right? And we need to figure that out at GitLab, right? And that's part of what incubation engineering is hoping to kind of structure, right? But how does that actually, what does that actually mean for GitLab, right? So I could see, someone who's really successful at GitLab say, look, we need to be able to support X, Y, and Z to really be serious about machine learning, as a fundamental feature at GitLab, right? Just at least define those goals and like say, this is how we're going to get there. This is what we need to do today. These are the incremental steps. And this is sort of the long-term, but help shape that with product, right? Because right now, I think the challenge is like, we all know it needs to happen, but what does it actually mean? Like, what are the features? What is the functionality? What is it that's going to really deliver value and make people want to use GitLab for this project? And, I'll give a good example. Camille, when he started at GitLab, CI was a separate thing. I think this is a class example. And the runner was its own thing. And Camille proposed that, hey, we should really make it CI tightly integrated with GitLab, right? Don't separate the auth, make it like part of the view. And that at the time was counterintuitive. At the time, everyone's first reaction was like, that's a terrible idea. Like they're different services, you got to treat them separately. But then I think the more and more, we made the case for it, Camille made the case for it, the stronger the case was. And eventually, I think it's GitLab 8.0, 9.0, we decided to merge it and make CI kind of an integral thing. It wasn't its own separate thing, a service. It lived and breathed within GitLab. And so I think the same with machine learning is like, what do we need to do to make machine learning an integral part of GitLab? And so I could see incubation engineering's role is like, okay, this is what we really need to do, right? Like the models, the data, right now the stuff that we have is can kind of support it, but not really. Like we really need to think about it in this way. And so I think one of the most powerful things you can do is just like, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to make machine learning an integral feature. I think that could be a really powerful thing. So it would have to be measured in that kind of form, like something really visible that people can really say, yeah, this made your life better and made everybody who's doing data analysis better, right? So I can see that being kind of one example. It's not the only example, but like I can see it as a classic example of like using the past history as a sort of a template. And it can also just be within your team. Like, how do you make significant impact in terms of like improve the quality of life, improve like the ability for people to work, how get things done. Like maybe it's just laying the foundations for like something bigger at GitLab, right?
Sounds good. So would you summarize that the incubation SEG is in a leadership position for that particular project?
I think so. I mean, I think the reason why a lot of people you hired because you're very senior, you're very self-driven, so you have the ability to make a huge difference. So I think that's pretty exciting, right? Like it's an opportunity.
Love that. Hannes, you have the next one as well.
Yeah, there are no other questions than mine, so I guess I can ask all of them. That's good. I think the next two questions are like kind of like belong together. Actually, it's more like, what do you think are the biggest technical challenges for GitLab in the next few years? Like where it's going to fall apart if we don't do something, like investing in foundations that are not going to like. I was talking to a few people, like I started 4 weeks ago, but was talking to a few people, and databases always came up as a thing.
Yep.
And vertical sharding, I think, has been established by now. But what if we actually have to go towards a horizontal sharding solution? How does that affect the open source product versus the software as a service product? Because it's kind of like tricky to introduce additional infrastructure, I assume, like Kafka, for example, or doing change data capture internally, but not in the open source product. Like those are just like rough ideas that came to mind, but I wonder what your thoughts are, and what I don't know yet.
No, I think you hit it right on the nail. I mean, I think the database scalability is probably the most important thing right now, because it's like we're running a single database for all these different customers, and it's really affecting our reliability and our performance, because we had, one customer right now can affect everybody else. So we have a noisy neighbor problem too. So I think it's going to be scaling out the database, whether it's horizontal sharding, as you mentioned. I think the current thinking is using some pod architecture where you could have customers, and will share a pod, but like they have their own dedicated resources for that. It's like reducing that blast radius, right? Like it's about isolation, right? Right now, I think the problem is like one customer can affect everybody else, and we need better isolation, right? If something goes down, we should be able to function. And then the performance obviously is kind of intertwined with that. Obviously, you can get better performance just by having smaller instances and things like that, but there is still a lot of work to be done to optimize what you have. And so I think we need to do a better job of that, and also just continue to improve the stability and the fleshing out a lot of our features, right? A lot of our features are not completely baked, if you will, and they need to be refined and improved. So we have a lot of challenges in those respects, and at the same time, we're trying to expand the scope of GitLab too, right? This whole initiative of bringing ML and new ideas to GitLab is like a whole nother area, and I think that's why we're trying to invest in this. So it's trying to build fix the plane that you're flying at the same time of like building it. So I think that's the biggest challenge we have, is trying to do all these things together without falling apart.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I coming from a company that has potted everything, and it was an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, and if you have thoughts on how we should best pod, we would love to, because I know we've been having a lot of discussion over the last 6 months. What does it mean to pod things? We looked at Shopify, and we said, okay, that works for them, but it doesn't work for us because of X, Y, and Z dependency.
I'm coming from Shopify. That's
Yeah,
why
I know.
Yeah, the biggest problem we had were like rebalancing pods. Obviously, like you need to move shops during production and in real time, and there's a system that has like a TLA plus proof, but in reality it can still fail, and those are the issues. And I think a part of the problems that we like before I moved, I was working in data engineering, and we recently got like change data capture as a thing, and I think it's really powerful. It's kind of interesting, and I was curious, like if we considering that, because I think I was talking to a data analyst, and they were saying like we are reading from replicas like every few hours or so to capture data into the warehouse.
Yeah, we may need something like that. I don't know if we've thought about it too much. We definitely are trying to add an analytical store. So ClickHouse is sort of the next thing that we're trying to add. And so I think that could complement a lot of stuff we're doing in Postgres right now, because we're doing a lot of analytic queries in Postgres, which is kind of an awful thing from a data science perspective, because you can't do these very well, and it requires, it's just the wrong tool for the job.
Yeah, I had one more question about like
Sure.
biggest challenges, because one wasn't technical but organizational. So another theme that comes up in like a couple of the conversations I had was product priorities versus building the platform. And do you think of like your role or the roles of other senior engineers at GitLab, that they should be the advocates for like reducing the technical debt, making things like sustainable for the long term, and those kind of things?
Absolutely, right? Because since you work on the code day to day, you have the best perspective and most reason to get this, fix this stuff. I think it's absolutely important, especially if it impedes some development or feature or product. Right? I think of a good example, our object storage implementation is not really ideal at GitLab, and there's a working group to address it, but it's been a long time technical debt, and it's kind of hurting us right now. So obviously it leads into like availability problems and scalability problems for customers, and things just time out when they shouldn't time out. So, I mean, those should be product concerns, obviously, and especially those things that impact just the overall experience of GitLab. I think that needs to be a priority. So I think if you can definitely get buy-in if that technical debt addresses like some customer visible problem. Obviously there's stuff that's not necessarily customer visible, but could be eventually. So anytime you can come up with a kind of a strong case of like, this will help us do X, then it makes it easier to prioritize. But I do think absolutely that like anyone at GitLab should be able to say, yeah, we really need to get this fixed. Like this is taking too long, or I don't think you should shy away from them, but obviously we have to have a balance between focusing on the tech debt and also kind of shipping things at the same time.
Lovely. Just to flip this around, Stan, do you have any question for us? We have 2 more in the doc, but just to give you a chance, do you have any questions for us?
No, let's get focused on the doc. These are great questions. I can have a wider discussion with you later, but I think like
All right, lovely.
a few more minutes. Let's finish out here.
All right, so Eduardo, you're next.
One question that I always make users and people I talk to is, what is the one feature that you want to add to GitLab? For me, it was Jupyter Notebook diffs. It was the one thing that I knew I had to implement on GitLab. And that's what I told Sid on my interview. Like, yeah, if I'm joining, the first thing I'm going to do is going to be that. And what's that for you? What's the one thing you want to, like, you really need to?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, this is, like I said, I think earlier I'm in object store. I would love to just fix that object storage story and just make that work, because I know it's causing problems. But feature wise, I think I felt like that like a year ago or 2 years ago. Like I think GitHub had the feature to paste spreadsheets into Markdown. And I was, at the time, early in my role, I was copying spreadsheets all the time. And so I really wanted that. And I added that about a year and a half ago. I think the second thing I added about a year ago was the /rebase. So everybody, did a rebase and merge request before. You would have to like do it from the command line, or the UI didn't really expose it. So I added the /rebase. So I find that the things I really want to do, I've already done. Now they're just stuff that takes longer and I haven't had a chance to do. I need to do. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Oh man, that /rebase is excellent. Thank you for that.
I didn't know this existed. Now I know.
There you go. Darby, you're next.
Yeah, so I was trying to think about how to phrase this. So I'll kind of talk through what I've written, but the org structure of incubation engineering is different intentionally from the rest of development. And I think that provides us opportunities to do things a little differently, or just approach problems differently, or whatever. I would be curious if you see things like kind of from your view of the world that incubation could be focusing on, different ways that we could be thinking about how we approach our different problems and stuff like that, just given sort of the different structure that we are.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think I come from the perspective, I think before this group was founded, like I spent a little of my time on ML and trying, because I know that was high on Sid's radar. And I think the one thing I struggled with is defining how we make ML friendlier for users. GitLab has a very like opinionated view of how artifacts and things get managed, but I would love to know like what are we missing from that? Like what do we need to be doing better in that sense? And just managing repeatability of ML, managing the ML like the ML training, all those things. So like what are the things that we should be doing and defining kind of like how to and kind of meshing that with GitLab. Like right now we do things where we try to fit things in the wrong, like a square peg in a round hole. Like if you look at one of my Tanuki stand, which trains like our issues, I'm using CRE artifacts to store the outputs of the machine learning, but like it doesn't feel like it's like the right thing, and like getting that back into source control is kind of cumbersome. Like I'm checking in as an LFS file, which doesn't really feel like the right thing either. So, I would love like for incubation engineering, it's like, hey, this is the kind of the new paradigm we think, we should take with GitLab, and how do we integrate it with the existing models? How do we take advantage of like, ClickHouse or whatever, just all the stuff that we're working on today, and how does that fit in the picture? So I would love the incubation engineering to be able to define like what is it that we need to introduce to GitLab to make it powerful for you to do your jobs. but I mean, that's my narrowest perspective. I'm not sure what you're all working on, but like from just the ML side of things, I can see that as being like, that could be game changing for GitLab, is just having a better workflow. Because I know there's certain companies that are, doing stuff specific for ML, but I'd love to know like, what can we learn from that, and what should we introduce to GitLab to make it, closer to those kind of solutions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I've seen a lot of what you're describing, where we have these things that we can build on top of, and it's not quite right, but it'll get us there. We can kind of ship the feature and then kind of move on, even though it's maybe not everything that it should be, or it's a bit of a hack to get it to work. So yeah, that I don't know. I'm aligning your answer with the thing that I've been working on, which is a better like handler for using files as like CI variables.
Right.
The current like file way of doing that is just a hack on top of like text strings, and like changing that, I think, can open up a lot of other opportunities for like it's like introducing a new primitive into the system that then can be built on top of for a bunch of other things. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
All right. The final question is a very serious question.
How do I manage to keep my contributions that high? I find things that I really enjoy working on, right? And so, or stuff that I think my activity is kind of a combination of merge requests and just commenting on issues. So we get, so a lot of times, some of the weekend work, I just do stuff like, well, I really would like to update that thing I meant to update, or, I'll look at an issue that some community person commented on, because, I want to have the pulse on the community and just kind of hear what people are saying. And that's what I mentioned in some of these slides, is just having, the wonderful thing about the open source is you can hear from the whole community. The terrible thing about open source is you hear from the whole community. And so, but I like to engage with people. Like people will have I'm having this problem, or, this is not working the way expected. And every once in a while, I like to pop in the issue tracker and just see what people are saying and try to be useful. And I think the short answer is that I really enjoy what I'm doing. So there's always like 10 things I want to do. I'm like, oh, I really need to comment to that, respond to that, or I need to review this merge request. And so, I just feel like I've got a lot of balls up in the air. And so this graph is just reflective of me being almost ADHD. It's like going to one thing on another and trying to help people one way or another.
Lovely. I think ADHD is home for all of us. So we get what you're saying. That's we've gone through all the questions. Last 5 seconds, if anybody has something else to add. If not, we can end this a bit early and give you 20 minutes of your time back. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much, Stan.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.